3 Apache children lay buried under tons of snow, and the lonely farmer who found them had no idea that saving their lives would spark a war that would determine the fate of an entire valley. But before you hear how courage can change everything, hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. You won't want to miss what happens next. The year was 1882, and the Colorado Rockies wore their winter coat like armor, beautiful, but deadly to anyone caught unprepared. Samuel Hayes worked his small potato farm in the shadow of Widow's Peak, a mountain that had claimed more lives than the Apache Wars ever did. The nearest neighbor was 15 miles away, and Sam preferred it that way. Ever since Martha died of fever 3 winters back, conversation had become as scarce as mercy in those unforgiving peaks. That December morning started like any other, bitter cold, endless silence, and the kind of loneliness that settles in your bones like arthritis. Sam was splitting firewood behind his cabin when he heard it, a sound that didn't belong in nature's symphony. Not quite a scream, not quite a cry, but something desperate cutting through the mountain air like a blade through leather. The sound was coming from the direction of Devil's Canyon, where no sensible person ventured during avalanche season. But Sam Hayes hadn't been sensible since the day he buried his wife. He grabbed his snowshoes, his rifle, and what little rope he had, knowing full well that whatever made that sound was probably beyond saving. The Old West had taught him that mercy was often measured in minutes, and in these mountains, those minutes passed like seconds. What he found in that canyon would challenge everything he thought he knew about enemies, family, and the price of doing what's right. Sam trudged through knee-deep snow toward Devil's Canyon, his breath forming ice crystals that clung to his beard like tiny diamonds. The sound had stopped, replaced by a silence so complete it made his ears ring. Every step forward felt like walking toward his own grave. The canyon walls rose on either sides like the ribs of some massive beast, and fresh snow kept falling with the persistence of a death sentence. When he reached the canyon's mouth, Sam's heart nearly stopped. A wall of snow and debris stretched across the narrow passage, still settling from what must have been a massive avalanche. Tree trunks jutted out at odd angles like broken bones, and somewhere beneath that white tomb, something, or someone, was still alive. He could hear it now, faint scratching sounds, like fingernails against wood. Sam began digging with his bare hands, the cold burning his skin like fire. 20 minutes in, his fingers struck something soft, fabric, torn and soaked with melting snow. Then he saw it, a small brown hand, no bigger than his wife's had been, reaching up through the white darkness as if grasping for heaven itself. But this was no time for prayer. This was time for miracles, and miracles required work. But what he pulled from that frozen grave would change his understanding of everything he thought he knew about the Apache people living in these mountains. The first child Sam pulled from the snow was a girl, maybe 10 years old, unconscious but breathing. Her lips were blue as summer sky, but her pulse beat strong and steady against his fingers. Before he could process what he'd found, more scratching sounds came from deeper in the avalanche debris. 2 more children were buried somewhere in that white hell, and time was running out faster than water through a broken dam. The second child was a boy, younger than the girl, curled around a leather bundle he clutched against his chest like it contained his soul. Even unconscious, his grip on that bundle was iron tight. Sam tried to pry it loose, thinking it might be hampering the boy's breathing, but the child's fingers wouldn't budge. Whatever was in that bundle was worth dying for, at least in the boy's mind. The third child was the smallest, a girl who couldn't have been more than 6, buried deepest under the snow and barely breathing when Sam finally reached her. Her tiny body was so cold it felt like holding ice carved into human shape. But she was alive, and in the Old West, alive was enough to build hope on. Sam wrapped all 3 children in his coat and somehow managed to carry them back to his cabin, though how he found the strength remains a mystery even to him. As he laid them by his fireplace and began the slow process of warming their frozen bodies, Sam couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just invited war into his peaceful valley. While the children slowly warmed by the fire, Sam examined the leather bundle the boy had protected so fiercely. The craftsmanship was Apache. He'd seen similar work during his brief time as a cavalry scout, before Martha convinced him that farming was safer than fighting. The leather was old, weathered, and decorated with symbols that looked like they told a story Sam couldn't read. Inside the bundle, wrapped in soft deer hide, was something that made Sam's blood run cold. A cavalry officer's insignia, tarnished with age and stained with what looked like old blood. But this wasn't just any insignia, it belonged to Captain Morrison, the man who'd led the massacre at Bitter Creek 5 years ago. Morrison claimed he'd lost the insignia in a poker game, but everyone knew the real story. It had been taken from his corpse by Apache warriors seeking justice for their slaughtered families. The boy stirred, his dark eyes opening to find Sam studying the bundle. Instead of fear, those eyes held an intelligence that seemed too old for such a young face. The boy spoke in careful English, each word chosen with the precision of someone who understood that words could kill as surely as bullets. You know what this means, white man. You know why we carry it. But knowing the truth about Captain Morrison's fate was just the beginning of Sam's problems. Because outside, the sound of horses approaching through the snow meant that someone was coming to collect what belonged to them. Chief Standing Bear arrived with 20 warriors, their horses breathing steam in the frigid air like dragons emerging from legend. Sam had heard stories about this man, how he'd united 3 Apache bands against the cavalry, how he'd turned every mountain pass into a killing field for soldiers foolish enough to pursue him. But seeing Standing Bear in person was different from hearing stories. This was a man carved from granite and tempered by loss. The chief dismounted and approached Sam's cabin with the kind of careful dignity reserved for sacred rituals or death sentences. His warriors remained mounted, rifles ready, but their leader came alone to the door. When Sam opened it, Standing Bear looked past him to where the 3 children sat wrapped in blankets by the fire. The relief that crossed the chief's face was so profound it transformed him from a feared war leader into simply a father who'd found his lost children. "These are my grandchildren," Standing Bear said in English accented with the music of his native tongue. They were traveling to winter camp when the mountain spirit grew angry. His eyes found the leather bundle, still sitting where Sam had left it on the table. "I see you have learned some of our secrets, farmer. The question now is what you intend to do with that knowledge." Sam realized he stood at a crossroads that would determine not just his own fate, but the future of every settler in the valley. One wrong word could turn this peaceful meeting into a bloodbath that would echo through the mountains for generations. Standing Bear picked up the leather bundle with hands that trembled slightly, not from cold, but from the weight of memory. "Captain Morrison came to our village 5 years ago under a flag of truce. He said he wanted to negotiate safe passage for supply wagons through our territory. My daughter, the mother of these children, believed his words. She convinced our council to meet with him at Bitter Creek, where the water runs clear and the grass grows tall." The chief's voice grew hard as winter stone. "Morrison brought 50 soldiers, not to negotiate, but to slaughter. They waited until our peace council was in session, then opened fire on unarmed men, women, and children. My daughter died trying to shield her youngest from the bullets. Her husband fell covering the other 2 children as they escaped into the rocks." Sam felt his stomach drop like a stone into a deep well. Every settler in the territory had heard Morrison's version of Bitter Creek, how Apache warriors had ambushed a peaceful supply convoy, forcing the cavalry to retaliate in self-defense. The newspapers had called Morrison a hero. The governor had given him a medal. The truth was uglier than anyone wanted to admit. "These children are the only survivors of Bitter Creek," Standing Bear continued. "And this insignia was taken from Morrison's body by my son-in-law's dying hands. It is all the proof we have of what really happened that day." But Sam was about to learn that the truth about Bitter Creek was just the beginning of a conspiracy that reached all the way to the territorial capital. Standing Bear opened the bundle further, revealing documents that Sam recognized as official government correspondence. The papers were written in English, though many were stained and water-damaged from years of careful hiding. As Sam read, his hands began to shake worse than the children's had when he'd pulled them from the snow. The documents proved that Bitter Creek had been planned from the beginning, not as retaliation, but as elimination. Morrison had been ordered to clear all Apache bands from the mineral-rich territory by any means necessary. The meetings, the peace talks, the promises of negotiation, all of it had been theater designed to gather Apache leaders in one place for mass execution. But the most damning document was a letter from the territorial governor himself, promising Morrison a substantial financial reward for resolving the Apache problem permanently. The letter specifically mentioned the need to eliminate any witnesses who might contradict the official story. Sam realized that these 3 children weren't just survivors, they were living evidence of a government conspiracy that would destroy careers and reputations from the local level all the way to Washington. "Now you understand why they hunt us," Standing Bear said quietly. "Not for revenge, not for territory, but to bury the truth about what your government ordered." The sound of more horses approaching through the snow meant that someone else had tracked the children to Sam's cabin. Through the cabin window, Sam could see 6 men approaching on horseback, their faces hidden by thick scarves but their intentions clear from the way they spread out to surround the building. These weren't cavalry soldiers. They moved too quietly, too carefully for military men. These were bounty hunters, the kind who asked no questions about their prey as long as the payment was sufficient. The leader pulled down his scarf, revealing a face Sam recognized from wanted posters in town. Jake Coleman, a man who'd collect bounties on Apache scalps, Mexican ears, or anything else that paid by the piece. Coleman had gotten rich during the Indian Wars by bringing in proof of Apache deaths, though most folks suspected he wasn't too particular about whether his victims were actually warriors or just convenient targets. "Sam Hayes," Coleman called out, his voice carrying the false friendliness of a snake oil salesman. "We're looking for 3 Apache children who got lost in the Avalanche. Their grandfather sent us to bring them home safe. No need for you to get involved in tribal business." But the rifles his men carried and the way they'd positioned themselves around the cabin suggested this wasn't going to be a peaceful handover. Standing Bear moved to the window and studied the bounty hunters with the calculating gaze of a man who'd survived too many ambushes to count. "They want the children dead," he told Sam quietly. "And they want us both silenced. The question is, are you ready to fight for what's right, or will you let evil men finish what Morrison started?" Sam looked at the 3 children huddled by his fireplace, the same fireplace where he'd sat alone for 3 winters, talking to Martha's ghost and wondering if his life would ever have meaning again. These children had been torn from their family, nearly killed by nature's fury, and now faced death at the hands of men who valued money more than human life. The choice before him wasn't really a choice at all. "Chief," Sam said, checking the loads in his rifle, "those men out there represent everything wrong with how we've treated your people. They're not getting these children. Not while I'm breathing." It was the first time in 3 years that Sam had felt truly alive, truly purposeful. Martha would have been proud of the man he was choosing to become. Standing Bear nodded with the respect one warrior shows another. "Then we make our stand here, farmer. But know this, if we fight together today, there will be no going back. You will be marked as an enemy by your own people, just as I am marked by mine for seeking peace." The sound of boots on the porch meant that Coleman and his men were done with negotiations. The door exploded inward just as Sam and Standing Bear took positions on either side of the room. Coleman burst in with 2 of his men, expecting to find a frightened farmer and helpless children. Instead, they found 2 armed men ready to fight for something bigger than themselves. The fight was brutal and swift. Coleman's men had expected easy prey, but they'd walked into a trap set by 2 men who had nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. Sam's first shot took down the bounty hunter coming through the window, while Standing Bear's war cry and the flash of his knife sent another man screaming back into the snow. Coleman himself made it 3 steps into the cabin before Sam's rifle but connected with his skull, dropping him unconscious to the floor. The remaining bounty hunters outside began firing through the walls, but the thick log construction of Sam's cabin had been built to withstand mountain winters. It could handle a few desperados with rifles. The real battle, however, wasn't being fought with guns. It was being fought in the hearts and minds of 3 traumatized children who watched 2 men from different worlds choose to stand together against evil. The eldest girl, who'd been silent since awakening, finally spoke. "Grandfather, this white man has a good spirit. Like Mother always said some of them did." When the shooting finally stopped and the surviving bounty hunters fled into the blizzard, Sam realized that the real victory wasn't defeating Coleman's gang. It was proving that courage and decency could bridge any divide, even one carved by years of bloodshed and mistrust. As Sam and Standing Bear tended their wounds and checked on the children, they heard a sound that made both men reach for their weapons. More horses approaching through the snow. But this time, the riders carried a white flag, and their leader wore the uniform of a cavalry officer Sam didn't recognize. Lieutenant Colonel James Mitchell dismounted and approached the cabin with the bearing of a professional soldier, but his eyes held the weariness of a man who'd seen too much unnecessary death. "Mr. Hayes, Chief Standing Bear, I come bearing news that changes everything. Captain Morrison is dead, killed 3 days ago while attempting to escape military custody. He was being transported to face court-martial for war crimes." Mitchell explained that a military investigation had uncovered Morrison's crimes at Bitter Creek, along with evidence of the government conspiracy that had made the massacre possible. The bounty hunters tracking the children weren't working for the Apache tribe. They were hired by corrupt territorial officials desperate to eliminate the last witnesses to their crimes. "These children," Mitchell said, looking at the 3 young survivors, "are not fugitives. They are witnesses under federal protection. And you, Chief Standing Bear, are no longer a wanted man. You are a key witness in the largest government corruption case in territorial history." The war that had defined both men's lives was about to end, not with bullets, but with justice. The real confrontation came not from guns or warriors, but from a choice that would define 2 people's future. Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell presented both men with an offer that seemed too good to be true: complete pardons, federal protection, and testimony before Congress about the systematic corruption that had turned the Apache Wars into a profitable slaughter. But the offer came with a price. Standing Bear would have to relocate his people to a reservation 300 miles away, ostensibly for their protection but really to keep them from any future incidents that might embarrass the territorial government. Sam would lose his farm. The land was too strategically important to remain in civilian hands, according to the military's new security assessment. Standing Bear looked at his grandchildren, then at Sam, then back at the colonel. "You offer us justice with one hand while stealing our dignity with the other. This is not the kind of peace my people can accept." Sam felt the weight of decisions settling on his shoulders like snow from an avalanche. These children had nearly died because adults couldn't find a way to coexist peacefully. "Colonel," Sam said, his voice steady as granite, "what if there was another way? What if instead of moving people around like chess pieces, we proved that different peoples could live together, work together, and protect each other?" What happened next would determine whether the cycle of violence would continue or finally be broken by 2 men who chose courage over convenience. 6 months later, Sam Hayes stood in his expanded cabin, now a combination home, school, and meeting hall where Apache children learned English alongside settler children who learned Apache traditions. Standing Bear had moved his people to the valley, not as refugees on a reservation, but as partners in a grand experiment in coexistence. The 3 children Sam had pulled from the Avalanche had become the bridge between 2 worlds. They translated not just languages, but cultures, helping Apache families and settler families understand each other's dreams, fears, and hopes. The leather bundle with Morrison's insignia now sat in the territorial courthouse, key evidence in trials that had sent corrupt officials to prison and changed how the government dealt with native peoples throughout the territory. Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell had been promoted to oversee the new Hayes Standing Bear Protocol, a federal program that encouraged cooperation rather than conflict between settlers and native tribes. The program was so successful that delegations from Washington regularly visited Sam's Valley to see how former enemies had become neighbors, partners, and friends. The lonely farmer who'd spent 3 years talking to his dead wife's ghost now had a cabin full of children's laughter, a valley full of friends, and a purpose that gave meaning to every sunrise. Sometimes salvation comes disguised as disaster, and sometimes the courage to do what's right creates miracles that echo through generations. What choice would you make, safety in solitude, or the risk of building something beautiful with former enemies? Comment below and subscribe for more stories where courage changes everything, because the Old West was built by people brave enough to choose hope over hatred.